Hey everybody, this is Nick from First Coast Math Clinic. In this video, we're going to talk about the building blocks of geometry, which are points, lines, and planes. Let's get into it. Let's start with points. And it's important that we understand these terms because, like I said, they're the building blocks of geometry. And we don't have specific definitions for these terms, but we can describe them. And point is basically just a location. So think about how we would represent a location on a map, right? We would have a dot or a point. And then we'd have something to name that point. So in geometry, we're going to use a capital letter. So we get point A, point B, point C, and so on. The next building block of geometry we're going to talk about is a line. And a line, again, has no formal definition, so we can describe it. And a line is basically just an infinite collection of points. It has length, but no thickness. So the important thing about a line is how we identify our line and how we name our lines. So let's say we start with 2 points, A and B. And through any 2 points, we can have a line. So we're going to draw our line through those points A and B. And if our line is an infinite collection of points, it's going to continue past A and past B. So to show that our line continues past A and past B, we're going to draw arrows on each side. And we want to name this line in some way to say that we're specifically talking about this line right here. So the way that we're going to do that is by using the points on the line. So we can name this line AB using the points, and to show specifically that we're talking about a line, we're going to draw a line above it, or we could reverse those points and call this line BA and just put a line above it. Now let's say we have point C here in between A and B, and we still want to name this line. Common mistake students will make now is to name this line. They'll use point A, C, and B, and they'll name a line like this. Well, think about what we're doing, right? We want to name this line in particular, so let me do this in red just so it's a little clearer, right? If I'm naming all the points from A to B, past B, and past A, an infinite collection, I have to go through point C, right? So I don't need to say specifically that we're including point C here, because if I'm going from A to B, I have to go through point C, right? So I'm not going to use 3 points to name my line. So I'm never going to do this. This is a common mistake that students make when they're naming their line. So if we have a line like this, let me clean this up a little bit. With that point C in between A and B, we could still name it line AB, line BA, but we could also name it AC, because if we're going from A to C and past C, well, we're eventually going to get to B, right? We could also name it, let me just write these out in red. We can name it CB, right? Because if we're going from C to B and we're going past C, we're eventually going to get to A, so we're including the same line. We can reverse these points too. I'm going to do this in green, so CA. All right, so if we go again from C to A, so all of these points, but again, a line is infinite collection, so we're going to go through C, eventually get to B. We're going to go through A and continue to the left. So again, we're getting all those points. And then CB, if we reverse those, do this in purple. So we've got BC. So we're going, again, with these points here, past C, well, we're eventually going to get to A, and past B, so we're going to include all those points too. So we don't need to use all 3 points, right? If we say CB, well, we're going past C, we're eventually going to get to A. If we say AC, we're going past C, we're eventually going to get to B. So the big thing you have to remember is when we name a line, we never use 3 points. Now you also may see just a line and like a letter above it. If you see this is just line L or whatever letter we have. So if we have something like this, X, we're just going to call this line X. So that's how we would name that. So we could just name the line using 2 points on the line, or we could just use a capital letter to name the entire line itself. Some textbooks, some teachers will use that as well. You'll see that occasionally. But this here, where we've got points on our line and you've got to choose some points to name the line, that's the most common. All right, let's get into planes and then we'll do some practice naming, putting all this together, points, lines, and planes. So the last of the basic figures that we're going to talk about is a plane. And plane is basically where all of our geometric figures are located, where we're going to draw all of them. Plane is a flat surface. No thickness. But it extends infinitely. So if we're going to think about a plane, we could think about it as, well, typically the way it's drawn is as a parallelogram, but you can almost think of it as like your piece of paper where you draw all your figures, your geometric figures, and do all your work on. All right, that's our flat surface. So we've got our plane here, and the way we're going to name our plane, there's two specific ways that we can name our plane. And let's think about, first of all, what's on our plane. So we have our points on our plane. So let's put a couple points here. We got a point X, Y, Z, W, and we could have our lines. So we talk about points and lines, so we'll put those on. So I'll put a couple points on these lines. We know a line's an infinite collection of points. So I'll put points L, M, N, and 4.0 on here too. Let me put these in slightly different colors so you can see these a little bit easier. So L, M, N, and O. So there's two different ways that we can name our plane. The first way is using any three non-collinear points. And I'm going to do another video on collinear and non-collinear in a little bit, but collinear are basically points that are on the same line. So if we want non-collinear, we want points that are basically just not on the same line. So let's look at what points here we have that are not on the same line. Well, we've got maybe point X, Y, and Z, right? I can't draw one line through point X, Y, and Z like I can through L, M, N, and O. So we can name this plane X, Y, Z. Let's think of maybe three other points that are non-collinear. So what about, we've got point W here, Y here, and Z here, right? We can't draw a straight line through those 3 points like, again, we can through L, M, N, and O. So we could also name this point, this plane, Z, Y, W. Right, so two different ways that we can name that plane, that plane using the non-collinear points X, Y, Z, or Z, Y, W. So that's the first way. The second way is oftentimes you're going to see a capital letter in the corner. So in this case, we've got letter R. So this is going to be just plain R. So we would use that letter to name our plane. So we could either use three non-collinear points. In this case, we've got X, Y, Z, or Z, Y, W, or we could use the letter that's in the corner of our plane, naming it, which would be plain R. So let's do some practice naming. So let's do some practice drawing and naming our points, lines, and planes. Okay, so for this example, let's say we want plane Q. On plane Q, we want line LM. We also want line Z, and we want points R, S, and T. So let's draw this out. So we're going to start with our plane. So we've got our parallelogram. We want to name our plane Q. So that Q is going to go in the bottom right corner. So that's the name of our plane. Now we want line LM. So we'll start with our points, L and M, and these points can go anywhere in our plane. Now let's draw a line connecting L and M. And let's draw some arrows so we correctly make this a line. We also want line Z, so I showed you another way that we could just name a line with just a single letter. So we could also have a smaller line down here with just a capital Z. So that's line Z. Now we want points R, S, and T. So let's put point R, S, and T anywhere on this plane. Now we know that from our naming conventions for our plane, we could also call this plane RST because R, S, and T. R, S, and T here are 3 points that are not in the same line. All right, let's do another example. All right, so for our next example, we've got our basic figure here, and let's identify what we can, right? So I want to start with our plane. So a couple ways we can name this plane, right? We've got this capital letter here, so we can call this plane W. Or we've got, our 3 non-collinear points here, so we can call this also plane N, L, M. We could also, if we want to use some of these points, right? We've got we can also include these points here as our non-collinear. So maybe if we want to do like R, T, and M, right? R and T are in a straight line, but M is not in a straight line with R and T. So we could use those as well. And maybe do like R, T, M as another name for our plane. Right, so a couple ways we can name our plane. All right, let's identify our line now. So we already have our points R and T. So we know that if we go from R to T, we continue past T and we continue past R. Well, if we continue past R, we're eventually going to get to Q. So if we just name this line RT, that's a correct way to name our line. Well, what's another way we can name this line? Let's do this in a different color. Maybe if I start at point Q, go to S, right? Because if I go from Q to S, right? If I go to Q to S, make this a line. Again, if it's a line, I'm going to extend past point Q. I'm going to extend past point S. I'm eventually going to get to T. So QS is another way that we can name this line. Let me clean this up a little bit. Well, we also have point Q and point T, right? Well, if we go from Q to T, we're going past point R and S. So I could just name this line QT, all right? Because if I'm going from Q to T, I'm going past point R, going past point S. So I definitely don't have to name this like QRT, all right? We're definitely not going to do this. We don't want that. And we don't want like QST. We don't want these 3 points. Remember, when we're naming our line, we're only going to use at the most 2 points to name our line. All right, let's go through one more way that we can name this line. Because remember, we could switch these as well. We could do like QT or TQ. SQ. TR, right? So we could switch those points. What if we do maybe here to here, QR, because we go from Q to R, and it's a line, we're eventually going to get the point S and point T, and we're going to go to the left past point Q, so this is going to be QR, and we could also switch this and make this RQ. Okay, but again, we don't want QRS, because again, it's redundant. If we're going from Q to R and it's a line, we're eventually going to get the point S. We don't need that S, so we're not going to do that. Okay? So that's our there are a couple different ways that we can name this line here. I hope this video helped you guys understand how to name, identify, and draw the building blocks of geometry, points, lines, and planes. If this video helped you out, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. This is Nick from First Coast Math Clinic.